It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey. Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. My reflections I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a
That ought to
ghost
do
of
it.
you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, old boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
How is everybody doing tonight?
You know, everybody has paranormal experiences. Like, you hear about them all the time. And you don't know, sometimes they're complete BS, and the people are complete flakes, and then other times they're a little bit more credible. And I thought, who is more credible than the men and women of law enforcement? It might be an interesting show to journey a little bit into that and get some of these firsthand accounts from the men and women who serve and protect us. So I recently ran across an article that had a bunch of these experiences in them. So the first one we're going to do is an elderly man teleported out of town. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read these to you, then maybe we'll talk a little bit about them. While working in remote Australia, we were forced to move on. An elderly Aboriginal man, because the other locals had accused him of witchcraft and other things. We drove him to his township, approximately 1.5 hours drive away. The other locals were terrified of him, as he was rumored to be a witch doctor. We dropped him off and warned him not to return to town for 3 days. We turned the vehicle around and drove back to town, flying. It took 45 minutes to drive back. Upon our return, we find the same elderly Aboriginal man sitting in the street. To this day, neither of us can explain it. Maybe the other locals had every right to be scared. So the basic idea of this one is that they had this old Aboriginal guy, and the local town people were kind of freaked out by this guy because he was like supposedly a witch doctor and acting all funny. So they call the cops in. The cops pick the dude up, and they drive him 1.5 hours away back to the town that he's from. And they drop him off, and they go back. They get back, the dude is back where he was in the first place. Okay, that's kind of spooky. But it's not without precedent. I actually had an experience kind of like this myself in my life at one time. Back when I was a teenager, we used to ride around a lot, because back when I was a teenager, you didn't have all the things that you have now. I mean, you didn't have all the video games. I mean, we had video games, but not like they do not Call of Duty on Xbox One, where you can play with people all around the world. You didn't have all that kind of stuff. You didn't really even have the internet. There wasn't a whole lot to do. I mean, there was no satellite TV, there was no Netflix, there was no Hulu, there was none of these things. So basically what we had to do was just ride around and hang out. So that's what we would do. We would ride around town, and then we would ride to other towns and cruise their little blocks and, just bounce from town to town in the area. One night I was riding around, and there was this really weird looking dog. And it looked almost like a wolf, but you could tell that it wasn't a wild wolf, that it was a domestic dog. But it was huge, and it looked like a wolf. And the weirdest thing about the dog is it would just stare at you. And it had one blue eye and one eye that was yellow, like a real sickly yellow looking eye. And I remember the eyes very well because they were extremely creepy. And when the dog looked at you, it almost seemed like he understood what you were thinking. You know what I mean? Like he was in your head somehow. Now, I have no proof of that. That's just a feeling that I got. So I'm riding around town, and I'm seeing this dog in multiple different places in town. And there should have been no physical way the dog could have ran from spot to spot faster than I could have driven from spot to spot. But everywhere I seemed to go, that's where the dog would be looking at me again. To be honest with you, it was rather damn creepy. So I decided I was going to get the hell out of that town for a while and go to a different town because this dog was kind of giving me the heebie-jeebies. And so what I did was I drove to another town about 15 minutes away by car. I got to this other town, and I'm riding around, and I'm looking for women, and, you know, the things that teenagers do. And lo and behold, here is that damn dog again. And so everywhere I went in that town, the dog would pop up. Same dog. Same creepy-ass eyes. So I went to a third town. Okay, the towns, by the way, for those keeping score, is my hometown of Strasburg is where I started. Then I drove to Front Royal, which is about 20 minutes away, 20 minutes by car. Then from Front Royal, I took 522 and I went down to Winchester. That's about another 20-minute drive. Okay, so I got to Winchester, and Winchester is a much larger town than Front Royal, and Front Royal is a larger town than Strasburg. But I'm in the biggest town, which is Winchester, and I'm driving all over Winchester, and once I get into the residential areas, I begin to see this damn dog again. You know, it'll be on one street, and then I'll drive like 5 minutes away to another little neighborhood, and there he is again. Same dog, same weird eyes, still looking at me. Nothing ever came of it. I mean, the dog didn't like appear in my back seat or anything cool like that. I mean, that would have been one hell of a great story, but I'm not going to lie, I'm going to tell you the truth, and that did not happen. All the dog did was simply look at us. But just the fact that this dog was in multiple places and in multiple towns, the exact same dog with the same weird eyes that didn't match. I mean, that could not have been a different dog. But there he was. So I've experienced something a little bit like that myself. Granted, it wasn't human, it was just an animal, but it was rather creepy nonetheless. The next one is about a police officer that heard children's voices in an empty house. And it says, I worked as a police officer in a small town in rural Nebraska back in the 90s. I was patrolling through town in winter. We had several abandoned houses in town, but one seemed to have the attraction of copper thieves, so we were told to keep an eye on it. I drove by around 7 p.m., and since it sat on a corner lot, I had a clear view of all four sides of the house. As I drove around the corner, nothing looks out of the ordinary. About 2 hours later, I drive by again, and the back door is wide open. I know that the back door was not open when I drove by it earlier. Looking at the snow on the ground around the house, there were no footprints. So I think, what the hell? Call dispatch, tell them I'm investigating an open door at that address, and ask for the county sheriff to start my way. I walk to the open door, pull out my flashlight, and shine it inside. The house had obviously been gutted for the most part. The plaster walls had been torn down, debris piles everywhere. Since there were no footprints in the snow around the door other than mine, and with all the dust on the floor not showing any footprints, I chalked it up to the wind, or maybe the door just opened on its own. I was about to secure the door when I heard a loud thump come from upstairs, and what sounded like kids laughing. So I entered the house and yelled out, "Police department, come downstairs." More of what sounded like kids playing. I tell dispatch that it sounds like there are kids in the house, and I start making my way through the kitchen into the living room where the stairs are. All the while cautiously checking the main floor. 2 more times I hear something upstairs, but since I've had no response, I start thinking maybe it's an animal. Still, I hear what I'd swear was kids laughing. I head upstairs and it all gets quiet. The upstairs is relatively small, with a hallway at the top of the stairs that has one bedroom on the right, one straight ahead at the end of the hall, and a bedroom on the left. As I get to the top of the stairs, I hear a thump in the bedroom to the left. I carefully peek around the door, and it's an empty room with a small pile of plaster and wood debris in the middle. No kidding. Sitting on top of the pile of debris was a page torn out of a child's book with a picture of a police officer on it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got out of that room, quickly cleared the other rooms upstairs, and got out of there. Told dispatch nobody in the house. Locked the back door and never went back in there again. Now this is a very, very interesting story to me. He hears kids playing and laughing in the house. That's not unusual. I've heard that before myself in houses. You hear that a lot of times in these spooky haunted kind of places. But the very creepy and weird thing about this story is when he goes upstairs and he finds the source of the laughing and the playing, it's just a page out of a kid's book with a cop on it. As if the ghosts were taunting him, as if they knew that he was there. Very cool story. The next one is called A Man Made Phone Calls from the Grave. My uncle works for dispatch in my town, and he recently told my family of the weirdest call he's ever gotten. He says that he had received a call from a landline one night, and when he answered it, there was only static on the other end. This happened 2 more times. Finally, he calls a squad to go check out the address from the caller ID. When the cops got there and walked into the house, they immediately saw that there was a dead body. The person had been dead for about 5 months. The craziest part about it was that there was no electricity or any other utility working, so there is no way they should have been able to get those calls into dispatch. But if they hadn't, who knows how long that person's body would have stayed there. To me, this story says that the dead body was the person that called. The ghost of the person that was laying dead in the house was the one that had made the call. There was no power, there was no phone hooked up anymore, anything like that. But yet the call was able to be made. To me, that's kind of cool, because it's almost like the ghost was calling for help. Like the ghost wanted the body to be found, so it was calling out. This next one is about a man vanishing from his hospital bed. I was doing security at a hospital with an ER, an ICU, surgical unit, the whole works, and I got called to several paranormal calls. Most were psych cases or paranoid people that had heard a strange noise. This time, more than one nurse saw a guy on the camera who was on his death's bed. A guy who kept saying, "I will not die in a hospital." Earlier that day, literally push his curtain aside and walk out of his room towards the elevator. A code was called, and everyone immediately posted at their designated locations. Within seconds, there were people watching the elevators and stairs, and security started combing the area and investigating. As I reached the ICU floor, I spoke with the lead nurse, and she told me of several of the nurses saw him leave. At that moment, monitors started going off. The guy never left. The guy went code blue and died right then. There were 3 witnesses on the report that say he got up and left, and were serious enough to call a code, which would cost them their jobs if they were wrong. The bosses would not let us watch the video, but the looks on their faces said it all. The bosses said the nurses did the right thing, and some things just can't be explained. The portion of the video I was allowed to see did show that nobody had left via elevator or stairs. So basically this one's pretty self-explanatory. There was a guy in the hospital, he didn't want to die there, he kept saying, "I'm not going to die here, I'm not going to die in a hospital." Who was he talking to? Maybe he was just talking to the error himself. Maybe, you get like a 2-minute warning or something before death. Who knows? That would be an interesting concept. If somehow you knew a short time before you were going to die that you were going to die, so you kind of had your time to get ready and make your peace with it. Kind of interesting idea. Don't know if it's true or not, but it's an interesting idea. So basically the guy is laying in bed, and nurses see him get up and leave his room and start walking towards the area that has the elevator and the stairs in it. And, they all freak out and they go chasing after the guy because he's at, death's door, and they can't have him just walking around and out of the hospital. So they go after him, and then a code rings out. The machines start going crazy saying this guy's dying. So they're like, "Oh, man, what the hell's going on?" So they rush back, and sure enough, the guy's laying in bed dead. He had never actually left and walked towards the elevator or the stairs because he was actually dead in the bed. So what they must have seen was the ghost walking out. The camera, it implies in the story, that the camera did not pick up anybody walking towards the stairs or the elevator. So what the three nurses saw, the camera did not see. The next one is about a father who sees a replay from the past. My dad spent his whole career as a cop and is a stereotypical straightforward guy with it who has little time for anything you might label as paranormal. That said, he describes one event from about 20 years ago that he just can't explain. One late afternoon in autumn, he was patrolling with a colleague in Newbury, which is Berkshire, UK, when they were radioed and asked to check out reports of a fight on the rural outskirts of town. Apparently, sounds of an altercation had been heard coming from a field, and locals were concerned, but hadn't been able to describe or give any more info. When they got to the field in question, my dad and his colleague hopped the fence and headed inwards, not immediately seeing or hearing anything. It was gloomy and a little misty at ground level, but apparently just about enough light was left in the day to see there wasn't obviously anyone about. Apparently they gave the field a sweep and were on their way back to their car, when, as my dad describes it, suddenly all went mental. Shouting, screaming, and the sounds of an almighty fight completely surrounded him. Even though he was standing in a field completely empty, other than his colleague, he says three things in particular stick with him. First, that he wasn't scared at all at the time, just sort of hugely confused. Secondly, the look on his colleague's face that basically said, WTF, you're hearing this too, right? And finally, that after a short time, the sounds just stopped, and they made their way back to the car and called in to say that nothing was going on. When pushed, he admits it felt like he was in the middle of something significant, and that he thinks he felt and not just heard the fighting around him. And with hindsight, he was more frightened after the event than he was at the time. He would never describe this as paranormal himself, but to me this always sounded like a replay type event people talk about. And subsequently learning about the Civil War history of the specific area in question backs this up. I've not heard of other accounts of similar stories from the area, but I haven't looked that hard to be honest. This one is very interesting because there's a lot of documentation that proves that this kind of phenomenon actually happens. All across the country at Civil War sites, you hear stories about ghosts, you hear stories about different sounds you hear and paranormal activity. Fisher's Hill battlefield, which is right down from my house, the story for that battlefield is that if you go there at night, you can actually hear the sounds of the battle going on. And that if you sit out there in the dark long enough, you can actually see the ghost soldiers fighting each other. One of these nights I'm going to go down there and I'm going to check this out for myself. The problem is that you're not allowed there after dark. It's closed to the public after dark. If you get caught down there, you're going to get in trouble with the cops or whatever. But I might just kind of try to sneak down there one night. If any police officers from my town are listening to this show right now, I'm just kidding. I will not be anywhere near the battlefield anywhere at night. Okay, now that's out of the way. For everybody else, I'm going to sneak down there sometime. And I'm going to check this out, and I'm going to see if it's actually true. I might try to take some video of the little journey that I take. I don't know how well it'll turn out because it'll be dark. But who knows, if there's ghosts that are all like illuminated, maybe you'll get to see something. If it is anything, I'll put it on the YouTube channel and let you guys check it out. If it's not, but it's just me making a fool of myself, I might still put it on the YouTube channel just for you to get a good chuckle. But there's a lot of precedent of this kind of phenomenon actually taking place, and it's well documented. Some of the theories behind the reason why ghosts haunt places is because traumatic events happen there that the ghosts have trouble letting go of. And so they're kind of forced into this energy loop where they just have to replay the same event over and over and over again. That's what this story sounds like it might have been. And that's definitely what the Fisher's Hill battlefield is, if that story is true. The next one is about people that heard screams, but they couldn't find anyone around. We were called to a residence out in the boonies. This was in Wyoming, so the boonies are really the boonies. At about 11 p.m. about suspicious activity. When we get there, we are told by the family living there that there are very strange screams coming from a creek area about 1,000 feet away. And sure enough, waiting outside on the porch with them for about a minute, It is very hard to describe what it sounded like. It was like a woman in a very severe distress, but higher pitched, and each scream lasted for about 10 to 15 seconds. It never sounded like it was saying anything. It just sounded like a cry of sheer terror, and it repeated again and again. We tell the family we're going to investigate, so we just walk down to the creek since it was nice out. We hear about 2 more screams, getting louder as we approach the creek. By now, we're both kind of freaked out. There are 2 possibilities. Someone is getting murdered or maimed in the creek bed, or it's a wild animal. As we approach the creek bed, we hear no screams for about 5 minutes. We search around and find nothing, yelling at the top of our lungs for somebody to come out if they are there. Then we hear the exact same scream behind us, exactly from where we came from. We get about halfway back to the house, and the scream comes so loudly it seems to be right next to us. We frantically shine our flashlights everywhere and find nothing. No eye glints of animals, no rustling of bushes, just silence. We trace our steps back and the scream comes from around the creek again. This time it lasted about 30 seconds and was much louder than before. Our retreat becomes a little more hastened. By this time we were both scared and verified with the family to call us again if they ever heard it. They never called again, and we got the hell out of there. I still don't know what it was. As an avid outdoorsman, I know that no animal makes a cry like that, especially one that can move stealthily without being spotted by flashlights. Something else that weirded me out was that it was completely silent while the screams were happening. During the summer in Wyoming, there is always some type of ambient animal sounds. Frogs croaking, crickets chirping, owls hooting, coyotes howling, etc. But there was nothing. Until we were leaving and the screams had stopped. Then a frog started croaking. It gives me the creeps just thinking about it still. That's kind of an interesting little tale. I wonder what would have happened if they would have stayed a little bit longer. I wonder if that would have turned into something really bad. Or if it would have just been them running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I guess we'll never know. The next one is called We Found a Child's Footprints, but No Child. Back when I was working as a cop on a military base, I loved working night shift. I didn't deal with 99% of the day shift dealt with, and what little stuff we did deal with was usually really interesting. Well, most every building on a base is alarmed, and the alarms are tied right into the desk so we know the instant they go off. When we get an alarm activation, we close the base and go check the building. Pull on all the doors and see if we can get in. If we can, then we go into the building and secure it. Check all the doors and corners to see if someone set the alarm off. Well, one night I was on patrol with my partner, and we got called to respond to an alarm activation at the elementary school. So we go, secure the building, and call in that the building is all secure. No problem. We keep patrolling. So about 15 to 20 minutes go by, and we get another alarm activation. We get back out there and check, and now there's a maintenance door open that leads into a boiler room. Nothing in it, we close it, lock it, and get out. Another 20 minutes, and another alarm. We respond. All the doors are still locked, and we can't get in. The maintenance door is locked. We call in, all clear. This time, my buddy and I sit on opposite sides of the school and watch to see if someone is coming, and yanking the doors real hard to set the alarms off. We sit there and watch. Nothing happens, and right as we're about to leave, another alarm activation. As we're sitting there, we inform the desk that we'd like the building manager on site to help us secure the interior and let us in. This is like now 3 a.m. The building custodian shows up, and we start doing a walkthrough, checking all the classrooms and checking all the maintenance rooms. And that's when we see one of the maintenance doors open with the lights on in the room. Now this room is literally the size of a closet. We walk down there and look in. No one's in it, and that door is locked when it closes. We look in there and we find a single footprint of a bare foot made of water. The left foot, as I recall, of a small child. Freaked the living hell out of us, because no one reported a missing child, and the entire building was clear and still locked up. No one left, no one entered, and we checked every inch of that damn place. Literally a 3-hour deep sweep, including inside the ceiling tiles. To this day, my partner refuses to go into that school. Speaking of which, schools are really spooky when they're empty. This is a really interesting story if it's true, because ghosts don't usually leave behind very much physical evidence. The fact that there was lights on and doors open, that's not much of a stretch, because you hear about that a lot from paranormal investigators. That's the kind of thing that they see. The kind of thing that they do not see is a wet footprint. That's very strange. You've got a couple different possibilities here if this is a true story. The first possibility, obviously, is that it's not a true story, that it's complete BS and it never happened. But if it did happen, you either had a barefoot kid that was running around that stepped in some water and made a footprint, but apparently he was just hopping on one foot because there was only one footprint, or maybe only one foot actually stepped in the water, the other foot didn't, so it didn't leave a footprint. And this child managed to evade the military police for the entire night and run around opening locked doors, turning on lights, and just being a nuisance of himself, and the police could never catch him. That's not very probable, but it is a possibility. The other possibility would be that you had some kind of child ghost there that was either playing pranks on the cops or was just up to whatever purpose a ghost is up to. Who knows what it was doing? That is another possibility. I would love to see a follow-up of this story, if there ever was one. Apparently there wasn't, because the guys left and they didn't go back. But it would be interesting to investigate that a little further and see what that was. Whether it was a real live human kid or whether it was a ghost that had left a print. Like I said, usually ghosts don't leave footprints. That's very strange. This next one is a dead woman called the cops. 3 years ago, our very elderly next door neighbor died suddenly in her house. They found her body 5 days later in the kitchen. Fast forward to late summer. I'm sitting in my house watching a movie, and all of a sudden about 8 police cars come out of nowhere. Sirens blaring, lights on, and most park in that empty house's driveway. Some park in my driveway. So I went outside to see what was up. A police officer went through the quick formalities and asked if I had seen anything strange in the past 5 minutes. I replied no, and rather hesitantly asked what was going on. He said that the police department received a call from the house next door, and when the operator picked up, the line went dead. I stayed at a friend's house that night. So basically, this is a very short one, but basically what this guy is saying is that his next door neighbor died 3 years ago. The house is now empty. There's nobody that lives there. Obviously, since the person's dead, there's not going to be a phone hooked up there, and no power either, most likely. If the realty office is trying to sell the place, there might be power, but there's definitely not going to be a phone still hooked up in the place. The police got a call from the house, and then the line went dead. So they show up, and so basically what they're saying is that the dead woman's ghost called the cops. For whatever reason a ghost would call the cops. I don't see any reason a ghost would, but that's the story. I tend to think this one might just be BS. I don't think it's real. And it's not because I don't think that a ghost would call 911. I mean, I don't, but who knows what might happen. The reason I find that this story probably isn't true is because 8 police cars showed up. Remember, that's what the guy said. He said he's sitting there watching TV or a movie or whatever he was doing, and 8 police cars come roaring up to the house. Sirens blaring, lights flashing, okay? Even if the police did not check the address first to see, who lived there, and realized that it was a dead person's house, that nobody lived there, even if they didn't do that, there's no way in hell that 8 police cars are going to show up to a house just because someone called 911 and the line went dead, okay? What you're going to get is you're going to get one police car that will make its way over there and investigate and see what the hell happened. They have no reason to show up in force like that. There was no screams. There was no, oh my God, please help me, there's someone in the house trying to kill me. There was no gunshots reported. There was no violence of any kind. It was simply a phone call and then the line went dead. So what they're going to do is they're going to send out a single police officer, or maybe 2, but in one car, and they're going to show up and they're going to get out and shine their flashlights around, tap on the door, try to figure out what the hell's going on. And if they see nothing and hear nothing, no one comes to the door, they're going to get back in the car and go home. or not go home, but go back on patrol. That's what's going to happen. You're not going to have 8 police cars come blaring up, like it's the scene out of Lethal Weapon or something. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so I find that this story, I don't think it's credible at all. The next one is a lady found a ghost hidden in her house. I was a 911 dispatcher for about 5 years. One night I got a call from a lady at a residence in town. 911, what is your emergency? Is this the police? She breathed. She was freaking out. Heavy breathing, scared, shaking voice. I've taken many calls like this, and from the sound of her voice, this was not going to be a routine call. I sat up straight and my heart started to pump faster. Yes, ma'am, what is your emergency? There's someone in my house. She trailed off. Very breathy and genuine, but not loud and freaking out. Okay, are you located at, and then he gives the house address. Yes. I dispatched the cars to start heading over to the address, and I don't give a reason yet. Okay, do you know who this person is? Well, no, I don't. I think this sounds so crazy. I think that there's a ghost in my house. She begins to sob and sound so scared. There's noises, and I know there is a ghost right in the other room. I can hear it right now. At this time, the sergeant asked me the reason of the call, and why I sent him and 2 other cars without explanation. Normally, you'd send 1 car to something like that. It's suspicious activity, I told him. What activity? He demanded over the radio. It was a fair question. Sir, the caller is claiming that there is someone in the house, and she believes it to be a ghost. Silence on the air for about a minute. 10-4 is all he said. By the time they got there, the ghost was gone, and the poor lady was a freaked out mess. And she kept apologizing for calling us. But it was real, she kept repeating. The officers later told me that her sincerity actually freaked them out a lot. And when they searched the house, guns drawn, even they were scared. There's not a whole lot to this story as far as it being scary. I mean, the lady calls 911 and says, hey, there's a ghost in my house. This is another one that I think is most likely complete nonsense and BS, because if you listened when I read the story to you, it sounded like I was reading a novel. When I'm reading it, it says, is this the police? She breathed, right? So that's saying that she didn't say it like, is this the police? She said, is this the police? Like she's half whispering it, you know what I mean? Because she doesn't want to alert the people in the house. This little story here is full of little descriptive things like that. And I mean, I'm a novelist myself. I write horror novels. I know that this was done by an author. This isn't done by just, a cop that's telling a story, or a 911 dispatcher that's telling a story. This is laid out like you would lay out a novel. Okay? You have your descriptors in there, you have your quotes, you have dialogue happening back and forth, and then there's the point where there's a stuttering part. Well, no, I know this sounds crazy, okay? That's actually written into the story. So, if this was an actual 911 dispatcher just relaying this story to the person writing the article, there's no way in hell they're gonna do all that. You know what I mean? This was purposely written to make the woman seem like she is panicked and can't get her words together correctly. Okay, this is a complete and total piece of fiction that was written by a writer to try to freak you out. The next one is a woman heard footsteps from a ghost. One evening about 8 years ago, it was pouring outside, and we got a call from an elderly woman. Have you noticed yet in this entire show that most of these are from elderly women? It's kind of a common thread here, huh? Now, that could either tell you that it's complete bull and the person who did the article just doesn't have much of imagination and can't come up with different characters. It's all just elderly women all the time. Or maybe it's ghosts really dig messing with elderly women. I don't know. But back to the story. She called in and said that she was hearing footsteps in her house, and she thought that there was a ghost inside because she regularly heard the sound of someone walking upstairs, but she lived alone. We went just to check it out and make sure that everything was okay. She stayed on the line with a 911 operator because she was frightened. About 3 minutes after she initially called in, she said that there was actually a man standing outside in her backyard, staring at her through her sliding glass door. Petrified, the woman froze in that spot and continued to stare directly at the man. For the next minute or two, she said that he was just standing there, still as can be, staring at her. Eventually, the man slunk off out of sight. When we arrived, about 12 minutes after the call first came in, we went to the front door. I remained in the foyer with the woman, and the other officer went to the backyard to see if the man was still hiding out or if there were any traces of him. I spoke with her for several minutes until the other officer returned. He said that there was no trace of anyone having been in the backyard. We set off to do a quick sweep before we left to make sure the house was all clear. In her living room, the room that has the sliding glass door, we discovered a trail of mud and footprints inside the house. I asked the woman if she had been outside at all that day, or if anyone had been over to visit her. She said no, that she lived alone, and that no one had come by to visit. The woman was very old, probably around 85, and had very poor eyesight and was hard of hearing, as elderly people tend to be. The woman obviously had seen the man's reflection and mistakenly thought he was in front of her, on the other side of the glass, in her backyard. In reality, he had been standing only a few feet behind her, in the same room while she had been talking to 911. Nothing was stolen, broken, or out of place, so we don't know what his intentions were. Who knows what would have happened had she not stayed on the line with the operator. I know it sounds like something out of a campfire story, but it was honestly one of the most unnerving and creepy experiences I have had while on duty. Now, I don't know whether this one is real or not, but I kind of hope it is, because that's a good story. The idea that this woman sees a man standing outside and she calls 911 because she's scared and freaking out, and then to find out that the man wasn't outside after all, but that he was actually inside the house and only a few feet away. That's a really good twist. I like that. That's a good story. Almost too good. Kind of makes me think, oh man, I think this one's fake too. Because let's put ourselves in this guy's shoes. What was he doing? Is he a burglar? Did he come to steal from the old woman? If that's the case, and he was inside the house, and she walked in and saw him, he would do something. He would either turn and run, back out the door, out through the yard, and down the street and get away, because he was panicked. Or two, he would panic and attack the woman. Or three, he would threaten the woman to get her to submit because she's an 85-year-old woman after all. What the hell is she going to do? It's not like she has a gun or a knife or a samurai sword or a pair of nunchucks or a flamethrower or a bazooka or anything that might come in handy if you're dealing with a much younger burglar standing 2 feet in front of you. She's just standing there with a phone. He's definitely not going to freeze in place like a rabbit in the hopes that maybe if he doesn't move she won't see him. She's standing right there, 2 feet away, looking right at him. Of course she's going to see him. She's on the phone with 911, telling the operator that there's someone standing outside just beyond the glass in her yard and she can see this man. So the guy knows that she sees him because he's standing 2 feet away inside the house. He can hear her. So he's not just going to stand there and pretend like she can't see him. In all reality, if he's a burglar, he's going to do something, okay? Now, if he was a killer, a murderer, some kind of psychopath bent on mutilation and destruction, if that's the case, then as soon as the woman sees him, he's going to attack her. He's going to knock her down, kill her, or knock her down and tie her up, or whatever he's going to do. He's going to get on with it. He's not going to stand there and just look at her and then turn around and run away or walk away. That's not going to happen. It's just not logical. There's other scenarios. Maybe he's a rapist. Maybe he comes in, he likes raping old women. Who knows? Same scenario as the others, though. He's going to do something. He's not just going to stand there. There's literally no scenario I can think of where the guy is just going to stand there for several minutes and then leave. It makes no sense. That's one where I think it's kind of BS also. I'm beginning to believe that maybe all these are BS. You know what I mean? Because there's so many in a row here that just don't sound credible at all, that maybe the whole article is BS. Maybe it's not true at all. But either way, it's fun to go over these stories. The next one is a man who died of suicide contacted me. I'm a security patrol officer. I work 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in Scottsdale, Arizona. I have the largest security beat in the Scottsdale desert, and part of my job is to respond to alarm calls in these isolated mansions throughout Scottsdale. One night I got an alarm call at a small airport where the rich play with their airplanes, Sky Ranch Airport. Part of the airport is residential homes with built-in hangars, and that's where the alarm was tripped at 2:30 a.m. On arrival, I went through the normal alarm process, called dispatch to make a call to the homeowners so no one should be there because the house was vacant. After the call is made, I knock on the front door very aggressively, just to make sure if someone is home, they'll hear me before I make entry. I've actually walked in on homeowners before at a different house. Anyways, I walk towards the door. I heard a little shuffling noise behind the door, very faint, but loud enough to be noticed. That being the case, I rang the doorbell and knocked on the door longer than usual, and nothing. So I then began the perimeter check, and I found the back sliding door handle was broken, but there was a little note on the inside that read, "Handle was broken. Realtor." The realtor placed a metal rod down to keep the sliding door from opening. I finished the perimeter check, called dispatch to let them know I was going to make entry. The house was beautiful and everything was fine, so I wrote out my entry slip and was resetting the alarm, but a fault showed on the display that read Zone 35, backroom door. At that very moment, my supervisor called me over the radio and asked if I knew anything about the house that I was in. He said back in 2008, the previous homeowner committed suicide by the front door with a shotgun when the economy crashed, leaving behind a wife and 3 kids. I knew he was trying to scare me, so I brushed it off and resumed my business. I walked to the back sliding door, and lo and behold, the metal rod was removed, and the sliding door was open about 4 inches, which was very creepy. The house has motion sensors, including sensors on the door itself, and none of them were showing up a fault. I put the rod back into its original place and armed the system. A few months later, I had an alarm call at a different house, and this time Scottsdale police assisted me. After the call was over and done with, we stood outside the home, and I asked the police if they knew about the house in Sky Ranch Airport. One of the officers said he was one of the first police officers on the scene shortly after the homeowner blew his brains out by the front door. They confirmed the suicide, and if I ever have to respond to that house again, I'll ask for backup. This one's kind of convenient, isn't it? That the cop that he just happened to have, assist him on that next call just happened to be one of the officers that was one of the first responders to the scene when the suicide happened. This next one is called "A Man Was Attacked by a Gray Creature." This ought to be good. Grandmother was a cop in Santa Maria in the late 70s till the early 90s. Man calls in saying there's a 7-foot gray man at his door. She goes to check it out. The door is jammed. The man is screaming and she hears a loud buzzing. She slams the door open and the buzz is gone. And so is the man. There's blood everywhere. She calls for backup and runs around and calls his name. She hears what sounds like someone yelling, but someone is covering their mouth. She finds him tied up. There's piss everywhere. Investigators say that he was in the room for at least 4 hours. The man lives alone in the middle of nowhere. He says he called the police 5 hours ago. They said the cop was on their way, and he reported seeing a 7-foot tall gray man with big eyes who did that to him. No footprints, no trace of any kind of invasion. My grandmother lost 4 hours somehow. The guy ended up killing himself a few years later, leaving a note behind, warning my grandmother that they are after him, and thanking her for rescuing him. If it was just that account on its own, I might say, hey, that might be a credible story, that might be something. But given the fact that it was part of this article that was filled with 25 different stories from law enforcement about their paranormal experiences, and the overwhelming majority of these, they're just things about them that make me think they're not true at all. Whether it's too well written with dialogue and everything in it, or whether, just logically doesn't make any sense, the things that happen in the stories. So I would have to say this one's probably not true either. I think the whole batch of them are made up. I think this was probably an article that was written by somebody who wanted to write an article that people would want to read. And so she thought, hey, 25 different, paranormal experiences by law enforcement. And it should be this amazing thing, right? But I don't think it's actually any tales from real law enforcement. I think these are all just kind of campfire stories that were made up and written down and put in this article. If it is true, then it was an entertaining article, so thank you for it. If it wasn't true, hey, you wrote some interesting, fun stories, and we killed an hour talking about it. So either way, I had a good time checking it out.
And thank you, James, for that. This is a show he's been wanting to do, and he's been bugging me for about a year and a half. And we never got to do it because we've just been doing so much stuff, guys. And we'll probably tell you a little bit about that in a little bit. But now, when he was talking about, one thing I'm going to bring up so we get this over with, is when he was talking about that dog. I remember he telling me about this one. And the dog with different color eyes, and it kept following him. And I always thought that was a weird story, because why would a dog follow you in so many three different towns? And that's got to be about 40, 50 miles apart altogether. So this dog couldn't have been there that quick. So what I'm thinking is that something was following him. And it wasn't a dog. It was formed as a dog, but it just wasn't. There's no possible way it could have been there that quick. I can understand maybe one town, and not even following you at every street. No, that's something that sounds like it maybe it was a demon or some kind of weird creature that was following you. And that sounds to me like that like you got out of there in a nick of time. Maybe a hellhound. I don't know. That's just my opinion. That was really a good story you were telling earlier, and that would trip me out too. I'll tell you quick something before I get into this. A long time ago, me, my friend, and my friend's mom, and another friend were in a car, and we were driving home, and this thing came out of nowhere. And the weird thing about this thing is it looked like a lion's head, but it had like it was running on 2 feet, but it went on all fours. It was like a kangaroo's body and a lion's head, and it was real long, and it just ran by us, and we thought we were crazy. Well, I seen it again a couple years later with a couple other friends, and it was the same thing. It looked like a lion. It was like a weird-looking dog, but it had a lion's face. It was weird, and it was like 7-8 feet long to head to tail. It was really weird. It looked like a kangaroo. So that's another thing I've seen out here where I live in California. And now let's get to these stories. Majority of them sound like they're not true and they've just been fabricated. The one that caught me was the kid making the noises. Like the alarms would keep going off at the school, the 2 officers, and then the alarms would go off and they would have to go running back in there, and then they had the custodian come in here. That was a weird story. I believe that one. That sounds like there was some kind of entity playing with them, like a child or thing. But remember, most entities that pretend they're childs are usually not good. So that one was a really good one. Another one I liked was the guy with the suicide, where he was one of the first responders to get to the scene of the suicide. And he went back to the house, and the alarm kept going off, and then he saw that the bar was up out of the sliding glass door, and it was open up 4 inches. That was weird. I might believe that one too. That could have happened, because people who kill themselves, they could be trapped in that house, and that's probably was what happened. That Ghost was playing tricks, or maybe it doesn't want that house to be sold because it's just stuck in that scene over and over and over. Now, a couple of the other ones were kind of just out there. The other one that got me was the monster one, the 7-foot gray man. That sounded like that's an alien abduction. That had nothing to do with any paranormal. A 7-foot gray man, so it sounds like a 7-foot gray alien. And they were like, the guy would end up killing himself because he went crazy, because they were probably doing some weird stuff to him, like experiments and stuff. That sounds like that could be true. It had nothing to do with the paranormal. So it sounds like that might be a gray alien, James. I don't know what you think about that one. Maybe you wanted to think about that. You didn't even probably think about that. But then he ended up killing himself. Well, what happened probably was he didn't. No one believed him that these things were coming after him and getting him, and they were probably doing weird things, and he was tied up and bleeding. So it sounded it might be a gray alien. 7 foot. That's kind of. I kind of think that. I don't know what you guys think. If you guys want, when you're listening to the show, you guys can always add in comments what you think about the show and what you think and what you believe and what you think it might have been. Is it a hoax or is it true? That's what you guys need to. You guys need to. If you want, just leave comments and always let us know, because we always like that information, because then we'll answer it for you guys and tell you what we think. So, and a couple, and I don't even want to get into the other ones because I just don't believe them. I think they're just stories, but they were good. It was a good line of bunch of the police department has to deal with. Those are crazy. Now, the one where the ghost was calling him, I don't believe that. I think that was probably made up. A couple other ones I just don't believe. I think they just threw a bunch of stuff together, and I think half of them are probably fake or exaggerated, and then there's some of them that could be real. And I don't. I like I said, there was a couple of them were very interesting, and even the story James told me was very interesting about the dog that kept following him because it either was some kind of entity or it was a hellhound or it was a skinwalker. It could have been. You never even thought about that, James. I mean, it could have changed because it had weird looking eyes. It wasn't weird. It was a weird looking dog. That's why I'm saying it could have been anything. So I believe James on that, because James, what you guys ought to know is he doesn't lie. He doesn't exaggerate. He just tells it how it is. And I believe his story. I believe that. But what I was getting to is, do I believe all these other stories? Probably not. I don't believe all of them. I'd say like 40% of it. And I think the other is either made up or exaggerated. I think people just like to be scared. Maybe they were just scaring people out of that page and out of that book. And out of the stories, and I think that's what it is they wanted to sell. And everybody likes the paranormal and weird creatures and monsters, especially, Halloween just ended, guys. So, we're still right on that level, in November just started, so we still have the spooky stuff going on. So that's what I think. Other than that, man, I hope everybody enjoyed the show. So, okay, I want to give a shout out to everybody on ParaX Radio. Thank you for listening to us. Remember, subscribe to James Hersey Jr.'s YouTube page. We're almost at 4,000 subscribers now. Remember to check out our merchandise page. James will tell you where to go. He'll tell you where to subscribe on the page. Also, we just started doing a new YouTube TV show called Tales from the Abyss, and we just put the new show out. So check it out. It's at Go Bar, California. It's at Go Bar in Lucerne Valley, California, and you guys will love it because I go down in this house where somebody was supposedly sacrificed and killed, and there's supposed to be a demon entity down in the cellar. And I go down there, and only 10 people can last 10 minutes down there. I lasted way longer than that. I broke that record, so you guys can watch it. So I hope everybody has a great night. I love you guys, misfits, sugar ladies, demon hunters, and monster lovers. I love you. Have a good night. Blessed be.
Yeah, I hope that you guys check out that show, Tales from the Abyss, on the YouTube channel, because it's a really interesting episode. Basically, the premise of it was we were told that nobody has ever lasted more than 10 minutes down in that cellar, because down in that cellar there is a demonic entity or multiple demonic entities that will run you right out of there. You'll basically run out screaming like a little girl. So what I thought was, okay, well, why don't we send Old Boy down there by himself? Just him and a cameraman, because why not, right? I mean, Old Boy's out of his mind, so why not send him down there in the dark with a demon? I thought it would make a good episode, and it did make a very entertaining episode. So I hope that you guys all watch the episode, and I hope that you enjoy it. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. Please go there and subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. You'll find the replay of every episode we do of Staring into the Abyss. You will find the new TV show, Tales from the Abyss, and you will find other videos that we do as well on different paranormal subjects and different things that interest us. It's a cool channel. It's a lot of fun. There's hours and hours and hours and hours of entertainment there for you, and it's 100% free. So take advantage of that and check it out. The merchandise store for those that want it is teespring.com/stores/staring into the abyss. That's teespring.com/stores with an S on the end /staring into the abyss. That's where all the merch is. You got shirts, you got hoodies, you got cell phone cases, all of it. All that jazz is there. So if you're into merch, that's where you can find it. Thank you all for listening to this show. Thank you for joining us here every week as we take this journey into the unknown and we try to answer some of these questions that we have about the paranormal that I think we all have. This episode was more of a light and fun one because I came across this article and I thought, this is cool. You know, I want to read this. And then I thought, well, I think everybody's going to want to read this. So I saved it. I didn't go over and read it and dissect it right away. I saved it because I wanted to read it with you, the audience, on the air. I wanted to share that with you, me reading it for the first time and you hearing it for the first time together. And I think I came to the conclusion that most of it was bunk, and I think you probably will too, but maybe you won't. Maybe you think I'm wrong on this one. That's cool. No worries. Just let me know down in the comments, and thank you guys so much for listening. We love you so very much, and until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do we. Bye-bye.